To say that we are closer to victory today is to believe, in the face of the evidence, the optimists who have been wrong in the past. But it is increasingly clear to this report that the only rational way out then will be to negotiate, not as victims, but as an honorable people who lived up to their pledge to defend democracy and did the best they could.
The quest for peace lies before us.
I do not have to tell you that our people are profoundly concerned about that struggle. There are passionate convictions about the wisest course for our nation to follow. The problems of Vietnam are quite complex. They are a mixture of political turmoil, of poverty, of religious and factional strife, of ancient servitude, and modern longing for freedom.
As we counsel young men concerning military service, we must clarify for them our nation's role in Vietnam.
Dr. Martin Luther King, the apostle of nonviolence in the civil rights movement, has been shot to death in Memphis, Tennessee.
Many Americans have lost confidence in what their government has told them about our policy. The American people cannot and should not be asked to support a policy which involves the overriding issues, war and peace, unless they know the truth about them.
As the war and possible solutions to it are discussed in other parts of the world, the results of the North Vietnamese offensive are an unforgettable reality here in South Vietnam. Long after the fighting stops, as it surely eventually will, all of this will remain part of the long heritage of the Vietnam War.
Oh. In 1967, unbeknownst to anybody, because I wasn't known to anybody, I tore up my draft card. Now, I was stupid enough to forget that you were supposed to burn it. But I tore it up, put it in an envelope, and sent it to the Salem County Board, draft board. And I struggled what to say to them, and so I wrote a very articulate letter saying, fuck you and fuck your war. Now, I want you to understand, we saw that every night on television. This was the first televised war. And we would come home and see that night after night after night, and our friends being taken off. More bombs were dropped in Hanoi than all of World War II combined. In May 1968, 2,800 American soldiers were killed in 1 month. That's half the total of the entire Iraq War. We had a general who napalmed the village who actually said we had to destroy it to save it. But he forgot to tell people to get out of the village. And they all died. For me, it was very personal. My best friend was Russell Garrison in high school, with a Norman Rockwell type thing. We used to go swimming in the irrigation pond and sit on the rock and figure out how in the hell you get out of Salem County. There he is. Russell and I wanted to get scholarships and go to school. I got one and he didn't. So he said, well, I'll join the Army because for poor people, that's the only way we can get an education in America. And Russell joined the war, went to Vietnam, and was killed at 19. Now, I don't know if any of you have been to a military funeral. You know, They dress it up, and they fold the flag, and they fire the guns. And I believe in ritual, and especially for the parents, it's important. But I sure in hell hope you never have to go to one. I've been to 4. And I'll never forget looking there and touching Russell's casket with the flag. And Elsie and Harry Garrison holding that flag that was all that was left of their 19-year-old son. In, by the way, a place where the same government we were fighting is now our biggest tourist destination and are an ally. He died for nothing. The flag doesn't count. The flag doesn't count. Well, fortunately, the young were called upon to lead the old. Now I take that kind of personally, but back then I thought it was a neat idea. And a gentleman in Massachusetts called Jerome Grossman came up with the idea of a national strike against the war in Vietnam. He knew a great leader from the McCarthy campaign, Sam Brown, and Sam said, well, I don't think strike quite works. It's a little too strident. But let me put a couple people together and let us talk about it. So Sam called David Hawk, probably the most respected person in the anti-war movement, who actually knew to light his draft card. You know what's so funny about and he called me, and then he called a woman named Marge Glencar. And we talked about it. Now, Hawk was facing 5 years in prison. I was facing 5 years in prison. But imagine this. All I had to do was tell him I was gay, and I could prove it. But it was more preferable for me to go to jail for 5 years than for anyone to know I was gay. So Sam gathered us. Now, I want to put some context to this. There were 4 of us. We were in the low 20s. Think of someone you know in your low 20s. We had $100 of that. We had 1 phone line and 1 office. By the way, there wasn't cell phones. There wasn't Xeroxes. There wasn't electric typewriters. There wasn't fax machines. There was no computers. There was no Facebook. Just us. And an idea. And Sam arrived at the name Vietnam Moratorium. And we said, amongst the 4 of us, I mean, we must have been loaded on dope or something, that we, the 4 of us with $100 and an office and a phone line, were going to bring this nation to a halt on October 15th, 1969. That we were going to ask the American people to stand down, ask universities to close, which they never have done, and discuss the Vietnam War, about our kids coming home in boxes. Well, we got together and we got busy. Hawk was in charge of the movement. No one was more respected in the movement than Hawk. They loved him. He was courageous. He was one of the leaders in the draft resistance. Marge was put in charge of the colleges. I remember a big file box with every college listed, Rolodex. And I was supposed to do the non-traditional allies, the political, labor, and Sam was the spokesperson and the fundraiser. Now, many of you might want to find Sam someday because he's the one that taught me to fundraise. And many of you have paid for that greatly. So we got busy. And Marge was working to get a college to close. Now, we thought Harvard maybe, Yale, Stanford, one of those left-wing, Berkeley. The first university to announce their close, I kid you not, was Rutgers University. And it was like a gift from God. No one expected that to happen. And then suddenly schools started following. Now, universities didn't close back then. This was unheard of to go on strike for a day. I went and worked on labor. Now, we had the International Shoremen and the IWW and some of the more rigid unions. But I went to see my friend Bill Dodds at the UAW, and I said, I think it's time for Mr. Reuther to come out against the war. Now, Walter Reuther, for those of you who don't remember, is one of my heroes. He led the occupation of the GM plants in the 1930s for 30 days where they had to bring the troops in to get them out to break the union. And now he was a very respectable head of one of the three top unions now in automobile workers. None of the big three had come out against the war. AFL-CIO wasn't about to. Teamsters had endorsed Nixon. I mean, come on. So we focused on the UAW, and Sam and I had meetings that was more complex than the Israeli-Palestinian peace talks. We had to hammer out how to make Mr. Roofer feel safe and wanted, and we had one additional problem. All of the Democratic liberals, now this is going to sound familiar to you all the Democratic liberals kept telling us we didn't know what we were doing, and that we had to be practical, and that we had to condemn others in order to make peace. And they also said there's no way you can be for immediate withdrawal. I remember being in one liberal Democratic senator's office, and he pounded the desk and said, "You're going to destroy the Democratic Party." Sound familiar to anybody? And he said, "This is so impractical, immediate withdrawal." And I said, "Well, who's going to tell the mother of the last one killed in Vietnam that they had to be killed because it wasn't practical? Do you want to go do that, Senator?" And he said, "You don't understand. How do we do immediate withdrawal?" And I said, "Oh, I'm so glad you asked." You put them on ships, and you put them on planes, and you point east and bring them home, which is in the end was what we did. So Mr. Reuther finally agreed to do this, and Sam and I went over to finalize the details, and he didn't want to do it. He knew it wasn't going to be popular among his constituency. He knew he was going to pay a price, but he had a big picture of Gandhi, Ben Shan's Gandhi, behind his desk, so I knew we had him. And he's taken us to the door, and he's going to make an announcement, and he's going to support us in our platform. And he put his arm around Sam, and he put his arm around me. He said, "How you doing, boys?" And I said, "Well, good, sir. I mean, this was a living legend to me. I was 22, 23. He said, "Did I tell you I hate to go to the dentist?" I said, "Well, no, Mr. Roofer, you didn't." He said, "Oh, yes, I hate it more than anything else in the world, but eventually I know I have to go because it's good for me. But when I get in that chair and they bring that drill down to my mouth, I grab them by the balls." And I said, "We're not going to hurt each other, are we, doctor?" Well, Sam and I got the message. I started shaking. I sort of walked out of there. "No, sir, Mr. Reuther." It was a real coup. It was special. And the whole moratorium started to take off. Something like 400 colleges by the end of June had agreed to shut down for the day. communities all around the country were planning observances. Pocatello, Idaho. Let me say that again, Idaho. Rang their church bells 40,000 times, one for each war dead. 6 in Enid, Oklahoma, made plans to read the names of the war dead, standing alone in the town square. On June 30th, 1969, Sam, Marge, Hawk, and I felt so comfortable that we walked over to a hotel room filled with hundreds of press from around the world. And we announced to the world that on October 15th, 1969, we were going to shut this sucker down.
Well, come on, all of you big, strong men. Uncle Sam needs your help again. Yeah, he's got himself in a terrible jam way down yonder in Vietnam. So put down your books and pick up a gun. We're gonna have a whole lot of fun. And it's 1, 2, 3. What are we fighting for? Don't ask me, I don't give a damn. The next stop is Vietnam. And it's 5, 6, 7. Open up the pearly gates. Well, there ain't no time to wonder why. Whoopee, we're all gonna die. Well, come on, Wall Street, don't be slow. Why, man, this is war, go, go. There's plenty good money to be made by supplying the army with the tools of its trade. But just hope and pray that if they drop the bomb, they drop it on the Viet Cong. And it's 1, 2, 3. What are we fighting for? Don't ask me, I don't give a damn. The next stop is Vietnam. And it's 5, 6, 7. Open up the pearly gates. Well, there ain't no time to wonder why. Whoopee, we're all gonna die. Come on, generals, let's move fast. Your big chance has come at last. Now you can go out and get those Reds, cause the only good commie is the one that's dead. You know that peace can only be won when we've blown them all to kingdom come. And it's 1, 2, 3. What are we fighting for? Don't ask me, I don't give a damn. The next stop is Vietnam. And it's 5, 6, 7. Open up the pearly gates. Well, there ain't no time to wonder why. Whoopee, we're all gonna die. Well, come on, mothers throughout the land. Pack your boys off to Vietnam. Come on, fathers, and don't hesitate to be the ones left to sub their soul slate. And you can be the first ones in your block to have your boy come home in a box. And it's 1, 2, 3. What are we fighting for? Don't ask me, I don't give a damn. The next stop is Vietnam. And it's 5, 6, 7. Open up the pearly gates. Well, there ain't no time to wonder why. Whoopee, we're all gonna die. Well, there ain't no time to wonder why. Whoopee, we're all gonna die.
Hot damn, Bobby, that was good. Took me back. I was ready to go for clenched fists. You know, 1969 was one of the summers of love. And as with most movements, everybody was falling in love in the community with each other, breaking up with each other, and sometimes falling in love again with each other. There was more sex around than a bathhouse in the 1980s. Unless you were gay. Now, unfortunately, this was the beginning of a long period of alcoholism for me. I would get drunk. Sam had left me this dump of an apartment at 1635 Massachusetts Avenue that should have been condemned years ago. But I'd walk from that down to Thomas Circle, And you'd go in, and there was an alley. No sign. And you'd knock on the door, and they'd let you in. Now, the first time I went, I was loaded, because that's the only way I could do it. I just was loaded. And when I got in, I sat there, and the bartender poured me a scotch. And I saw an interesting guy at a table across the room, and he said, put his hand on me. He said, you can't do that, buddy. I said, what are you talking about? He said, we have undercover cops in here. And he said, it's D.C. law that if you take your drink and walk it across the room to someone else, you are arrested for solicitation. That was law, not enforced in straight bars, of course. So you were left to pray into Jesus that Kermit the Frog didn't sit next to you. Because you might as well go home. One night, God, he was handsome. I had made up names. You know, our society taught gay people to lie, and lie well. We could even fool our parents. You know, our churches urge us to lie, our labor unions urge us to lie, our families urged us to lie. Every institution in America said to us that we were so bad, please lie who you are. Well, I was good at it. One night I went to the bar and I was Carl from Colorado, a cowboy, and I had a hat and my boots and a big belt buckle. Another night I would be something else from somewhere else, and of course it'd be the same people most of the time, and they were making up names themselves. It was very hard to keep track of everybody. In walks this vision for God. My type, 6'4", cowboy boots, tight jeans, showing a lot in those jeans, white shirt, T-shirt, brilliant green eyes, best smile. And I said, oh, dear God, if there's a God, please let him sit next to me. And he did. And I said, hallelujah, sweet Jesus. He can't go anywhere either. I got him. And the way you let people know each other so you wouldn't get arrested by the undercover cops that you were interested, you would rub up against their leg underneath the bar. And if they were interested, they would rub back. And if they weren't, they would pull away. Well, I rubbed his leg like this, and he rubbed back. He said, you want to get out of here? I said, oh, sweet Jesus, yes. So you couldn't leave at the same time. So he said, I'll meet you outside in 5 minutes. Now, I honestly didn't expect him to be there when I got out. Self-esteem issues, not good looking enough, whatever. And also I was very scared because I had lost my first lover in an automobile accident at 19. So I wasn't really in the mood for intimacy. Now, what I did with my first lover and to my friends in the moratorium and everyone else, I made him a woman. And told everyone that I wasn't dating because my girlfriend died in an accident. We went back to his place. He didn't live too far away. And I walked in, and it was like him and I had been separated at birth. We liked the same poets, Tennyson, pre-imperialist, Neruda, Yeats. We liked the same music, Janis Joplin, White Rabbit, Elvis Presley, who I adored. And I thought, God, we have so much in common. And he bought out a drink, and we sat down, and he said, I want to have a talk with you. I said, okay. He said, I know who you are. It's kind of silly saying you're Craig from wherever I told him I was. And he said, I've had a crush on you from afar. And you shouldn't be in that bar because you're going to hurt the moratorium. So he said, I want to create a safe place, a sanctuary, where you can come and give you a key and we can be together. Well, that was music to my ears. I hadn't let anyone be intimate with me since Kit died. We went in. We did not have sex. We made love. It was like at each touch, we both had been starved for this for a long time. I think we all have experienced that. Well, the moratorium must have been grateful because I was happy every day. I was getting nookie. And I'd go back there and we'd have these wonderful conversations and play music and then make love. And you know when someone loves you. You really do. And you know, sometimes we kid ourselves and want to believe they love us, but they don't. I knew he loved me by the way he touched me and the way he talked to me, and I loved him. He said, well, his mom and dad were sick, and I think it was the hot shop at the bottom at the Statler Hilton. I don't remember. There was some sort of ugly coffee shop with orange vinyl. And he said, we'll meet there for lunch the following Monday. And I went, very excited. His name was Frank. Well, I don't know what his name was. And he sat down, and the two guys in a suit came over, and they showed the badges. Now, if you're gay and an anti-war activist, you're not going to say, excuse me, may I look at those a little more closely? Because a badge is not good news for a gay man. And they sat down, and they poured out on the table the most explicit pictures of Frank and I having sex. Now, I wish I had those pictures today. I'd pass them around. It was somewhat hot. Well, my first thought was to warn Frank. How could I have got him involved in this? So I semi-ran over to his apartment and put the key in. There wasn't a stick of furniture. There were no books. There were no records. There was no safe place in sanctuary. And then I thought, what have I done to the moratorium? How come I couldn't keep control of my urges? Why did I drink and go out and do this and put them in jeopardy? I should have been honest with them. I decided to kill myself. That the moratorium could stand a suicide more than they could stand very explicit sexual pictures being distributed to the press and to my parents, which they threatened to do unless I got out of the anti-war movement. So I went back to that apartment at 1635 and went over to Virginia, and I got a gun and some bullets. And a lot of scotch. And I told my friends that I had the flu and they better stay away. And I got very drunk. And put a bullet in and put it up to my mouth and couldn't do it. Now, my response to that wasn't relief. I thought I was a coward. All those people going over, dying in that war, all those people going to prison for resisting the draft. And here I was about to blow it out of the water, and I couldn't even make the sacrifice of pulling the fucking trigger. I tried 3 times. And I just, how could I put, you know, my coordinators were very pro-gay. That was not a problem. But the country wasn't, and the movement wasn't. What happened is that I would have never been allowed to go up on the hill or meet with Mr. Ruther or do anything if anyone knew I was gay. Just a fact. I mean, hell, we couldn't even move drinks around in a bar. But I felt like a coward, and I felt sick to my stomach that I had perhaps done something that would interrupt the flow of the moratorium. And I didn't have courage to tell them. I felt like such a coward, such a waste. And I kept trying to pull that trigger, and I couldn't. Somewhere along the line, I had a God shock. And I said, well, you know, I'm not sure who these characters were, and they're coming to see me again to see if I'll get out of the moratorium. That was their demand, or they'll send it to the press and my family. I'm not sure, I don't know, that they want to know that their taxpayer money's paying for Frank to perform explicit sex acts with a gay man. And I mean mighty fine sex acts with a gay man. And so I said, I'll hold on. And this, again, I felt like a coward because I felt I was putting the moratorium in jeopardy. I'll hold on. I'll keep the gun. I'll keep the bullets. And if it comes out, I will instantly kill myself. And then they won't have to deal with the gay issue. Society could deal with people killing themselves more than they could deal with us being gay back then. At the end of the week, I walked out of the home, and there on the street was those two agents in an ugly Dodge. What is it about the federal government they can't buy decent-looking cars? I was terrified. But I tried to sit up straight and try to find a posture of dignity. Some way that I looked strong when I felt so weak and ashamed of myself. And I strolled down to the car, and they rolled down the windows. That's before buttons, you know. They rolled down the windows. And I leaned in like an old Kentucky farmer chewing tobacco to look at them. And they said, well? And I raised my back, and loud as voice as I could, out of my fear, said, send it to them.
Everything comes and goes, marked by lovers and styles of clothes. Things that you held high and told yourself were true, lost or changing as the days come down to you, down to you. Constant stranger, you're a kind person, you're a cold person too. It's down to you. It all comes down to you. Go down to the pickup station, craving warmth and beauty. You settle for less than fascination. A few drinks later, you're not so choosy. Closing lights strip off the shadows of this strange new flesh you found. Clutching the night to you like a fig leaf, you hurry to the blackness and the blankets to lay down an impression and your loneliness. In the morning, there are lovers in the street. They look so high. You brush against a stranger, and you both apologize. Old friends seem indifferent. You must have brought that on. Old bonds have broken down. Love is gone. Ooh, love is gone. Written on your spirit, this sad song. Love is gone. Everything comes and goes. Pleasure moves on too early, and trouble leaves too slow. Just when you're thinking you finally got it made, bad news comes knocking at your garden gate, knocking for you. Constant stranger, you're a brute, you're an angel. You can crawl, you can fly too, it's down to you. It all comes down to
Well, I decided to roll up my sleeves and get busy. We had a war to stop. The Nixon people approached me because I was in charge of politics for the moratorium. And they sent these young ones over, and they thought they could sweet charm us. That's all. We were 21, 22, 23. You know, I mean, they were just going to, say, let's have a party. We'll bring Tricia Nixon. I said, well, let me talk to Sam and David and Marge. And they said, are you out of your fucking head? And I said, no. I said, look, we meet with them. If it doesn't go well, we can say we met with them. So I decided to host a party at this pit that Sam had left me. Now, let me describe this apartment that we were bringing the White House staff and Tricia to. The whole floor was linoleum. Hadn't been cleaned in years. I'm not even going to tell you about the tub and the toilet. The kitchen was linoleum. I don't know what I had been trying to cook there, but most of it ended up on the floor and on the stove. So I called my sister Patsy, and you all know Patsy. She has my back all the time. She's my best friend in the whole world. And I called Patsy, and I said, hey, listen, we have Tricia Nixon and the White House staff coming over and the moratorium staff. Senator McCarthy had agreed to come. Pulitzer Prize winning Mary McGrory, the columnist, had agreed to come. And I called Patsy, and I said, why don't you come down? And she said, where is it? And I said, well, my apartment. And she said, good God, no. She says, I'm coming right down. The next morning, she came in with bags full of tie-dyed sheets and made draperies out of them and threw stuff over a sofa that I'm always grateful that CSI didn't exist back then. And, and put an ironing board up and put a sheet over it, and we were waiting for the Secret Service to visit because of Tricia. So I don't know if you all know it, but back then there was one cleanser, Comet. So she went all over the floor shaking Comet on the tub, on the sink, in the bedroom. She shook Comet in the kitchen. And we get ready to start scrubbing, and the city water went off. And the doorbell rang. And it was the Secret Service. I wish I had a picture of the expression on their face when they walked into that apartment. But we knew Tricia was not coming. But they came, and it was a pleasant enough evening. But it was the last time we were pleasant. Mary McGrory, who won a Pulitzer Prize for the Washington Star and the Washington Post, was one of the most well-known columnists in America. She broke down many barriers for women, and she was vehemently against the war. So Mary thought it was a good idea that some of us come to her apartment and meet with Ehrlichman. That's Mary. Now, Ehrlichman, there were big four in the Nixon administration: Haldeman, Ehrlichman, Kissinger, and the president. Now, I just want you to know that this week is the anniversary of when they all were indicted. But Mary invited initially Sam and myself and Johnny O over. And Mary, of course, was famous for her meatloaf. The president had even come over to her, and her apartment was as small as mine, but clean. And the meal around the table was somewhat pleasant. And so, as always in Mary's case, we'd go into the small living room, and we were sitting there. And we started telling him what we were going to do in the Vietnam Moratorium. He said, that's not going to happen. That's aiding and abetting the enemy. That's treason. We won't give you permits. We'll arrest you all. And Sam said, well, then there's two more will take our place. And he said, and we'll arrest them. And I said, and two more will take their place. And I kid you not, he put on a fake German accent. Ehrlichman, come on. And said, then we will build the walls higher and higher to contain you all. Now, that's not something a 23-year-old kid wants to hear from one of the highest men in government. The conversation ended, and as we're all walking to the door, he grabs me by the arm. He said, David, I just wanted to tell you something privately. I said, yes, Mr. Ehrlichman? He said, we know all about you. We know all about you. And then he just walked to the door. Well, then it started getting ugly. They really started attacking us. We were Viet Cong sympathizers. We were communists. We killed puppies in the middle of the night. We were aiding and abetting the enemy. Anything they could pull out of the hat, they did. But they didn't stop us. Actually, they kind of helped us, I think, because it took off. And until our sisters had their recent Women's March, we were the largest demonstration in the history of America. Now, we gladly surrendered that title to our sisters. We held on to it for 47 years, so we're sort of generous with that. And by the whole world seemed about moratorium. On the day of the moratorium, on the other side of the international date line, troops went into battle with black armbands, peace signs on their helmet, or saying moratorium. Whole units went in. That was the first report we got. And then the night before, never in the history of the United States has the House of Representatives been kept open all night long, because of the rules that are different from the Senate, for a single issue. And our goal was to open up and keep it open all night long, discussing the war. And thousands gathered on the Capitol steps, singing and chanting. And we watched the sun come up over Washington. That day, we held up in her office. Mary tried to sneak in with some meatloaf, but they wouldn't let her. And the reports started coming in. 150,000, Boston. A Chicano moratorium in East Los Angeles. Hundreds of thousands in New York. Charlotte, Virginia. 800 universities shut down for the day. We were on the cover of Time and Newsweek. We had them on the run. Those church bells rang 40,000 times in city after city. And those men who died in Vietnam will always be remembered because their names were read by their neighbors, who cared enough to remind America who they were. So, that night, there was one last event. And Sam was handling the press, and David was working with the press. And I went to a rally, that was my assignment, at the Washington Monument, where Mrs. King spoke just a little over a year since Dr. King was assassinated. It was really her first big public appearance at a rally. And she spoke, and we walked with candles, about 50,000 of us, up 17th Street, down to the front of the White House, where she kneeled and she lit a candle and said a little prayer. And she got up and she looked at me and she said, "Martin would have wanted me here. Martin would have wanted me here." Well, like idiots, the four of us had said in the press conference in June that if the Nixon administration didn't listen to us, we would do another mass demonstration in 4 weeks. Now, the New Mob had called a march, and they did not have the resources to do it, but David Hawk was a genius at getting them to relinquish control to allow us to help them. You got to understand, no one was more respected in the movement than David. And we negotiated. Suddenly, from all over America, people like Ann Wexler, Jim Johnson, Tony Podesta flew in to prepare for what we believe to be 250,000 to 400,000 people coming in 4 weeks. Now, we had to put them up all night. It isn't like today, we had to feed them. So another mother for peace, and a woman, they made sandwiches, and we opened up the gymnasiums at American University and Georgetown universities, and people slept on the floors and slept on church basements. And it was a lot to do. My favorite was a woman named Arlene Popkin. Allison knows her. Arlene was very, very bright. I think she went to Yale or Harvard. I don't know where she went, but she was extremely bright. But we needed someone very bright to figure out how many porta potties we needed and how many tissue each person would use. And Arlene immediately labeled herself the shit lady. And I'd pick up my phone. She said, "It's the shit lady. We need more tissue." She carried that still to today with pride. Now, this was a time when it was getting ugly. Nixon did a speech on November 3rd to the nation, attacking us all, personally and viciously, making us sitting targets. Called us infinite snobs, communists, aiding and abetting the enemy. He then ordered 10,000 troops into Washington, D.C. to protect the White House from me. Really. All I wanted to do was redecorate it. I mean, come on, it was Pat Nixon. And tension was building. On the left, the Yippies were formed and the Weathermen were formed, and they believed in a more aggressive approach to resisting the war, including various sorts of violence. And they made clear that they were coming to Washington and going to do their thing the night before. Sam and David I met with them in their office, all crowded in, and they said they were even going to trash our office. Well, Sam had spent almost every cent we had. We couldn't afford to trash the office. So we called Cora Weiss. Now, you have to understand, you can't call the cops. That's like calling the man, you know what I mean? Oh, we would have been in such trouble in the movement if we had called the cops. But we needed security. And Cora called the Longshoremen's Union. Yeah. And the next day or the day after, a group of the ugliest, meanest looking men I have ever seen in my life showed up at our offices with more scars than a road map. They were 6'6", their hands would fit on my head and encompass it. I didn't want to go into my office. I also was kind of turned on, to be honest. No one was going to trash our office, and they acted as our security during the big march. But because of the violence, we all knew something had to be done to set the tone for the big march. Everybody was coming. It was clearly going to be the biggest march in American history. Now, in 3 weeks we did this. Well, you listen, 3 weeks without cell phones, none of your little gadgets, computers, things that you run into me in the street, or I jump in front of you so you do run into me in the street. We decided that 3 days before the mass march on Washington, that we would do a march against death. Now, I have to tell you, to this day, it is the most moving thing that I have ever participated in. There was a tent outside Arlington Cemetery. The volunteers had a book with all the names of the 40,000 approximately that had died up to that point. And volunteers had cut placards about this big. And you would go on, Like when I first marched, I wrote Rusty's name on it. And we'd put it around our neck, and in a single file line that was never broken 24/7 for 3 days. There was not an empty space around that clock for 3 days of people carrying the names of the dead around their neck. And we would walk past Mr. Lincoln, and then we went in front of the White House, and we would stop and shout the name of a Russell Garrison. And around the clock, all night long, those in the White House would have to deal with who they were sending to die. And we continued in single file up Pennsylvania Avenue to the front of the Capitol. And the Carpenters Union had made caskets, wooden caskets. And we would lay gently Russell's name in a casket. And then it came on that this really started getting a lot of coverage. So musicians, Joan Baez, Peter, Paul and Mary, Harry Chapin, all sorts of musicians started playing 24/7 around the clock so that the dead in those caskets would know music. It was one of the most moving things I ever went through. Well, that day, moratorium night, all 4 floors of the moratorium was like a beehive, with, just buzzing, with volunteers on the old Stetner and passing out leaflets and getting sandwiches made and finding housing and trying to figure out how we stop riots. And that night at DuPont Circle, the weathermen had their day of rage. And they started knocking out windows on DuPont Circle. Now, my sister, who had come down, and by the way, who had gotten 50,000 in Baltimore on October 15th, Patsy came down, and we walked outside, and it was filled with tear gas. Now, this was one of my proudest moments with my sister. My sister had never smelled tear gas before, and I got to show my sister how to deal with it. Oh, Patsy, it's nothing. You take your handkerchief, you cut a lime or a lemon, and you rub it in, and you put it around your face. I was so proud. The next day, we all gathered at the Capitol. We thought 600,000. The Washington Post today says well over 800,000 to 1 million. To march down to the Washington Monument. And we thought it was only appropriate that those caskets should be lifted on the shoulders of the peace movement and lead the march. And that we would follow. And hundreds of thousands gathered. And Pete Seeger sang, and people spoke. The moratorium was on the front page of everything. It was a national story. One of the biggest stories of the year, actually. Sam and Hawk had to go do speaking or media, and Marge went somewhere. And on not planning it, I found myself alone in the headquarters, 4 floors. It wasn't planned that way. I was invited, but I still was reacting to the blackmail. You know what I mean? I just wanted to keep my head low. And much to the dismay of the other workers in the moratorium, I played the harmonica sometimes. All I knew was "We Shall Overcome," and I played it over and over and over again. So I thought I'd get my harmonica and play it. And I was sort of sad on this great day of triumph, of Americans coming together for peace. And then I said, what the fuck? 4 kids in their low 20s, $100, 1 phone line, 1 office, no cell phones, no computers, no faxes, no copiers. Sounds like a Julie Andrews song. What a day. We did it. We changed the course of the war. We put this administration on defensive, and we saved lives. Our work isn't done, unfortunately. As many of you know, I'm a liberation theologist, have been for 57 years. I've organized. Put bumper stickers for John Kennedy on, good old Irish Catholic. I went through the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, gay rights, women movement, environmental movement. And there was always an underlying sense that if we worked it well, the system would work for us. Even when we were beaten and attacked by troops, we never felt our democracy or constitution was in jeopardy. Now, we are all gathered here, and all of us have our issues. Some of us want to stop the tyrant that lives in the White House from pouring coal into the rivers. Some want to stop him from removing Native Americans from their land, or knocking on our Hispanic neighbors and dragging them out of bed or in front of their daughter's school to deport them, or condemn a whole faith of people whose only crime was believing in their God. And we could all get busy in the traditional way. And this is what our elected officials haven't figured out. Now I'm going to let you in on a secret, because you're going to have to do this. They keep responding to the president like it's the same old rules. And he's invented new rules. If he gets caught, you tell a bigger lie. If the bigger lie gets some traction, you tell a bigger lie. We have to change. If we approach this the way we've approached this in the past, we're in the danger of losing not these issues, but our Constitution and our democracy.
I saw above me the endless skyway, and I saw below me that golden valley. This land was made for you and me. I roamed and rambled, and I followed my footsteps through the shining sands of the diamond desert, and all around me a voice was calling. this land was made for you and me. This land is your land. This land is my land. From California to the New York Island, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me. Now the sun came shining, and I was strolling, and the wheat fields waving, and the dust clouds rolling, and a voice was sounding as the fog was lifting. This land was made for you and me. This land is your land. This land is my land. From California to the New York Island, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me.
Well, there's no way I could accept applause without introducing to you two heroes who are in the audience tonight and bring them up on the stage. Our beloved Marge died an early death. But with us tonight, for the first time together in 47 years, are my two fellow coordinators, Sam Brown and David Hall.
This land was made for you, and you, and you, and me.
I'm gay, you know. This is Carl Siciliano from the Ali Forney Center.
David, liberation theologian that you are, tonight I was reminded of a beautiful image I saw at Chartres Cathedral of these tiny little evangelists standing on the shoulders of these gigantic prophets. And to me, it's just a powerful image of the profound debt that we owe to the people that came before us, who had the courage to pave a way, to have vision, and to suffer for justice. And it's so moving to me that you agreed that you offered to partner with us tonight and to connect the struggle of our homeless LGBT youth to the struggles that you fought for all of your life. So with great gratitude, I say thank you so very much.
Good night.